you put all three of them to, like, you could take all any one of them on their own, but like the list of problem banks expanding, and the FDIC no longer telling people how much the problem banks have, and the like housing delinquencies being higher than 2008, you can't argue, however pedantic you want to be about any one of those things that I could, non-specifically gesture at. In context or out of context, you can't argue that any of those is a good sign. You have to acknowledge that these are all really, really bad signs. But anyways, like I was saying at the beginning of this, what I wanted to get started on right away while it's fresh in my mind, the 2008 financial crisis. Who all remembers anything about that or knows anything about that? The folks in my audience younger than me, which is a strange thought, admittedly. Again, that sort of perception of time. I would have been like 5. Yeah, I was in elementary school when it happened. I remember my parents talking about it because, it impacted a lot of people. In the 20th century up to the 2000s, a speculation bubble grew and grew and grew with housing. How housing is privately owned. Nobody can actually buy a house outright, so you get a mortgage and whatever. And that means that you're in debt, and there's a bank that's in charge of owning that debt. The problem is that debt is also exists in the form of a contract. So banks would trade around people's housing debt for profit and for gambling purposes. And they started packaging that debt together with other, like basically each person's debt was like a poker chip, right? That banks traded around. And what they started doing to get more money off of their poker bets was that they would start bundling in chips with each other, some of which were better or worse value chips, right? So like, if there's like a gold chip that's worth the most, and then there's like just a plain old white chip that's worth the least. It's Balatro brain. But like, it's apt because gambling, they started packaging in more and more and more white chips with the gold chips. And the pile itself, the stack of chips itself, was considered to be gold. And of course, the people that did the designation are like, how good is your pile of chips? Were also in on this, like, gambling scheme. So you got an insane amount of, like, super shitty, like mortgages and whatever. And like, banks were just giving this shit out like candy, knowing that like people couldn't afford to pay for their houses, and it got really messy really quick, and it became a house of cards. Basically, all these banks, all these finance bros, and like housing, like real estate companies were walking around saying, "Look at this great stack of gold chips that I have. We're gonna make millions and millions of dollars." But then, it's a house of cards because all it takes is one peek at the actual stack of chips, and they're all like garbage white chips. They're all like mortgages that nobody can afford to pay. And of course, the signs were there, but nobody wanted to look at them because the way it works is if you look at it, that's when the house of cards falls apart. If somebody looks at the white chips and sees that they're white and not gold, the whole game is given away, and the whole fucking gambling scheme collapses, and everybody loses all their money, which is exactly what happened in 2007, 2008. The stock valuation and whatever, like the stock market and all that bullshit that nobody that like isn't real, and pretend indexes and whatever, plummeted in value, and like all these banks, like a ton of banks went bankrupt, and yeah, it was just a giant fraud scheme of like banks cooking the books, essentially, is what it was, because they were all like at the core of that game that I described with those like fake poker chips is that they're all lying about how much money they have. They're all like saying, look at all this money we have, but they don't actually have the money. And every bank was doing this. All the real estate companies and banks and the, investors and whatever were doing this. And I'll get to that. And it brought the whole ass world economy with it. There are like a lot of countries in Europe still have not recovered from the financial crisis of 2008, 17 years ago. and they still have not recovered. All of that fake gambling, lying, fraud, bullshit, cooking the books, and it, as fake as it all was, it was real enough to crash the entire world economy. And of course, governments acted very quickly to help the banks and not to help anybody that fucking got screwed out of their house, out of their job, and whatever. Many people pinpoint 2008 as either the beginning or the acceleration of economic decline in America. I would pinpoint it as an accelerator and whatever. Life got way worse for way, way, way many people after 2008 because, of course, when the banks got recouped for all their losses and shit, they just offloaded all the costs to their employees and consumers. So they the bottom of society bore the brunt of the mistakes of the fucking bankers, right? That's the housing crisis of 2008, and it resulted in economic devastation. The United States managed to recover, kind of. Now what we're seeing is the exact same fucking thing again. I have a couple links that I can go to in a bit to show you what exactly is going on. But you remember how I talked about banks were giving people really sketchy and potentially fraudulent mortgages, and people obviously couldn't afford these houses and whatever, but banks were selling them to people anyway, and people were going into debt, and eventually there's going to be a time when the banks come to collect or something like that, and they're not going to have the money and whatever. That's been happening ever since 2008 too. None of the shit that was going on that caused 2008 the financial crisis actually stopped after that point. It all kept happening. And now it's happening so hard, and banks have been deregulated so hard that we're getting another financial crash specifically with housing. Housing being one of the most perennial political issues of the day, especially in the United States, because nobody can fucking afford rent. And what is mortgage but a somewhat slightly different kind of rent? Nobody can afford their mortgage either, and not comfortably anyways. Everybody's in debt. There's a whole ass debt economy. It's been a house of cards for some time, and it's about to come crumbling down, and it will probably be worse than the 2008 crisis because of some statistics that we can look at in a second. That's the context. Yeah, and this is why I titled the stream, Wake Up, Babe, 2008 2 just dropped. It's the sequel. It's even bigger and better, parentheses, worse than last time. Debt economy is another word for slavery. Kind of. It's not quite the same. It's more akin to debt peonage, which is, Americans might not immediately recognize it as slavery because the slavery that we're familiar with in America is chattel slavery, but it is a form of forced labor, coercive labor markets. Let's take a look at some of the shit that wanted to look at. So the FDIC is a government corporation that insures people's bank money. That they say hey, banks, you actually have to have the money to give to people when they come to withdraw money. They also have a list of what they call problem banks, as if any fucking bank isn't problematic enough on its own. There's a list of banks that are especially toxic. Here we go, from USA Today. FDIC problem bank list grows as industry profits dip. Now, line go up is not always good, but line go down is always bad. Did Donald Trump remove the law that they have the same required money? They're trying to do that right now. That law was put in place after the Great Depression, because what happened in the Great Depression was all the banks were gambling, they all lost, economic crash, people went to withdraw their money, and the banks were like, dog, that's not your money anymore, we spent it, you're broke. And so they passed a law to prevent that from happening again, and they're currently trying to overturn that and take that law away. But as far as I know, it's still there. So, a top US bank regulator added 2 banks with combined assets of roughly $84 billion to its so-called problem bank list in the third quarter. So this would have been like late last year, I think. While overall industry profits dipped 8.6% in one quarter. Yeah, rich people are like, please, we have to do the Great Depression to Electric Boogaloo. Yeah. The FDIC typically doesn't identify firms that are added to the list, which includes banks that receive particularly low credential score or confidential scores from bank supervisors. Each bank has like their credit scores. Credit scores for people are basically just part of this debt peonage system, but credit scores for banks are like an indicator of how well they can manage money and how trustworthy they can be insofar as like, if we loan you this money or we invest here, like how likely is this bank going to be to like pay back the government or something like that. So those scores, how fucking, how much do we actually believe that this bank is going to pay us our money back is declining, it seems. Enough for a couple banks to be added to this we don't fucking trust you bank list, which is insane. Let's see here. The FDIC chairman said the overall level... Here, hold on. Better get through this section. The overall level of problem banks now totaling 68 firms. Oh, it's almost 69. It could have been nice. Is not atypical. What? Oh, maybe he's covering his ass, trying to be like, calm down, don't panic. I'll get to that in a second. You know, whenever economic crisis looms, a lot of like department heads and like financial moguls and whatever are like constantly saying don't panic. But he added, it is a consequential development for individual firms that comes with added scrutiny. We certainly pay close attention, especially to individual institutions that may have heightened supervisory issues relating to the downgrades, he said at a press conference. Let's see. Delinquent loans increased, apparently. Was there ever a really good reason to put money in the bank? Yes, actually. If you can believe it, there was a time period after the Great Depression, after the New Deal, when money accrued like actual interest in the bank. There was a reason to put money in the bank as opposed to just keeping it under your mattress for a while in the 20th century, which I think ended around the like 80s or 90s, or even if I'm not mistaken, at 2008. When you put money in the bank, it actually accrues compound interest over time, which means that your money will actually, like, it won't just stagnate and lose value to inflation. In some cases, it could keep up with inflation, or depending on the kind of account you put it in, whatever. It's like a way to, like, get randos to invest money and stuff. It's like putting peanut butter on a mousetrap. Sure, I don't know what that refers to, but alright. But yeah, for a while, there was actually a reason for people to put money in the bank, because you could get more money on top of it. Theoretically. This was only really useful for people that already had a lot of money, you could probably imagine. But nowadays, you get less than... I think I have some money in, like, savings and whatever, and it gets, like, 0 point something percent interest, which is nothing. Like, I'll check it, like, I don't fucking touch my savings account, right? But, like, I'll check it every month, and there's like, oh, you got 20 cents this month. It's like, alright, great. So it's basically just the same. So there's the list of problem banks is expanding as per USA Today. The rest of the article is spent trying to, like, say everybody keep quiet, there's no cause for concern or whatever, which I do not believe. But ultimately, I don't have, like, I'm not super financially literate insofar as, like, the finer details of like how a bank works. I know some of the basics and I know some of the important stuff, but like some of this stuff I'm not going to be able to parse. That was just one of 3 like really big pieces that I wanted to take a look at, and it was relevant actually to bring up specifically the problem bank list. You know, I didn't know that this list existed. Apparently the government does keep track of banks that are so problematic. They're like, yeah, we can't fucking trust you to pay back government loans. Like, the federal government paid you money in loans, or loaned you money, and like, you're so unscrupulous and untrustworthy that we don't even think you're going to pay the federal government back, so we're putting you on the fucking problem bank list, which is crazy. Anyways. Wake up, babe. YGK streaming on a Sunday. True. Anyways. Now we get to the second thing. We go to this site, Wolf Street. This is like a business finance outlet, but here, the headline reads, FDIC ends disclosing total assets of banks on problem bank list as disclosure might suddenly trigger a disorderly run. These are the shitty banks. Acting chairman of the FDIC board released a statement of today, along with materials of the quarterly report by the FDIC on the banks that they insure, saying that the FDIC would no longer disclose as of today the total assets on its problem bank list. So, understand what this means. The list of banks that are so shitty that the federal government doesn't even trust them to pay back government loans is growing, right? More banks are being put on that you're a really shitty bank list. And the FDIC is now saying they're cooking the books so hard, we're not even going to tell anybody how much money they have. Because if we tell anybody how much money they have, it's going to cause a crisis. You understand what that means? It means like we're at that point. You know? Yeah, they're just hoping that they can keep it alive for a little bit longer. Each one of these financial collapses and crashes has been like a rug pull. They're basically just trying to hold it together a little bit longer so they can do the rug pull, the golden parachute, the bailouts, the whatever, so that the bankers get their share and everybody else gets fucked. You know? Me, when I definitely am not committing fraud, don't look at my bank assets. There's nothing to see. You're not allowed to look at them. In fact, the government is telling you not to look at them. You know, remember that the way that I described that scheme, the house of cards is collapsed by somebody looking. You know? What this means effectively is that we're in that situation again. All these banks are walking around like, oh yeah, look how much money we have. And they're all like making shit up. They're saying like, look at this stack of gold $1 million chips. And they're all like white chips worth like $5. You know? Didn't the economy crash when people said, I want my money back inside the banks? Yes, that's exactly what a bank run is. When people lose trust in the banks, when they see that the banks are like not being honest, when they're cooking the books and whatever, people start wanting to take their money out of the banks because they know that it's a very unstable situation, and that causes the collapse. You know? Is the realization of that instability. That's what happened during the Great Depression. That people realized that, and they saw that the banks were losing a bunch of money, and then like the banks were like, "That's not your money anymore, dog. We spent it," you know, because there wasn't a law that prevented them from spending that money. Right now there is, but the consequences would still be really bad. You know. Whoa. Okay. All that money I lent you, could I maybe have it back, please? Is 95% of recessions. Yeah, because fundamentally, every recession is just like all the house of cards crumbling down after a bunch of speculation and gambling, because it like creates a bunch of pretend money that isn't there. It's all like a bubble. Couldn't they say the government wouldn't punish us? What? Like, well, if the government doesn't punish the... Wait. What do you mean by that? Doesn't the government work for rich people? Oh, yes, they do. But it is, you know, in 2008, the government bailing out the banks actually did sort of prevent the crisis from getting worse. In a way, I'm not fully knowledgeable on Keynesian economics, but quantitative easing is a real thing. Basically, the government has the authority to fucking pump money into the economy nonstop. And if you do that hard enough, you can like stop the crisis from getting way worse. If you know where to put the money. I'm really, really simplifying stuff, but you know, that's why the government does that. And also because there's a bunch of like private contracts where banks get really preferential deals and stuff. And it does, you know, it does also act as an opportunity for them to do a rug pull and transfer wealth upwards. You know? Sounds like we have a bunch of band-aids on a river. Yeah, it is truly. It's like there's a river of blood and the dam is made of fucking band-aids. Like, that shit is not gonna hold. You know? Especially with a government like this that would probably be unwilling to do some of the Keynesian measures that Obama's administration or Bush's administration or, you know, FDR's administration did. It's entirely possible that the Trump admin just kind of lets the crisis get way worse. You know? Definitely feels like we're up to a big recession in the near future, given that there's like bubbles everywhere. Yeah. The entire economy basically is a bubble, because if you look at the economic recovery after 2008 and COVID, a lot of that recovery was not seen by the like average American and the average citizen. Like, the economy bounced back pretty quickly for the people doing the gambling and investing and stuff, but real wages have stagnated. In fact, real wages are lower now than they were in 2008. At the time of the crisis, real wages have decreased. You know? If anything, we're in, like, the average person is in more of an economic downturn now than they were in 2008. Even though things did slightly recover because unions have gotten a little bit stronger, a lot of that wealth is just like pretend bubble shit that is floating around at the top. And because there are so many bubbles, it's, you know, all of them are going to pop eventually. You're the worst damn Republican since Herbert Hoover is starting to hit differently. Yeah. Yeah, we're getting the double meaning to that one. Just looked at my bank saying, please trust us, bro, right next to my money. Yeah, basically average bank policy. So, sorry, I buried the lead because I was racing there, and I need to be able to concentrate on the race. Words are really small. Yeah, the fucking fine print was like, we're not liable for such and such. So we've got this problem list, like problem bank list, that is growing, and that the FDIC is now saying we're not going to disclose how much in assets is held by these problem banks that are really shitty and are probably cooking the books. That's probably why they don't want anybody to look at them. Now we get from Newswire. Yeah, now might be a good time to withdraw your money from the bank. Now we get from Newswire. Freddie Mac housing delinquencies now higher than peak levels seen during the 2008 crisis. Housing delinquencies mean that like people are late in paying for their stuff, right? you have to make rent every month. Particularly, I think this pertains to mortgages, where like you have to pay, like you're paying off the value of your house so that theoretically eventually you'll own it free and clear. And people are really falling behind on that. The debt trap is getting worse, and like I said, nobody can fucking afford housing, and that part of it is getting worse. Ultimately, the crisis was like at a moment like sparked by somebody looking at the House of Cards, but the engine that created the House of Cards, the engine that made the crisis possible, was fucking people not being able to pay for their houses because the value of housing went up, wages stagnated, and banks were like, fuck it, we'll sell people houses anyway. We're gonna like we'll just make it easier for people to take on debt, and that way people don't have to afford houses to buy housing from us, and we get to keep all the money anyway. It's like, oh, haha, everyone wins, except, you know, you get put into fucking infinite debt, you know? And now that debt is starting to catch up with people, you know? Yeah, the accelerationists are definitely eating good right now. Accelerationists have never eaten so good in their lives. Holy shit. So it's not just a 1-2 punch, the 1-2-3 punch. The list of problem banks is growing. The FDIC is no longer disclosing how much those problem banks have. And and people are way behind on their housing payments. The debt is starting to catch up with people and with the banks. You know, that debt, remember I said earlier that debt is like one of those poker chips. The assets of the banks, they own that debt. It is an asset to them. So the FDIC is like, we don't want you seeing these debts that are getting worse, you know? Specifically because it's going to cause that crisis to happen. You know, so we are like, it's basically inevitable at this point that this bubble pops in some form or another. This might be what takes the whole world down with it. We'll see. I don't know how, like, bubble-ified the whole economy is. Like, to a certain degree, it is very much like the whole capitalist economy is a bubble of investing in speculation and gambling. But I don't know how, like, what level that has reached relative to the point it would need to reach in order to mean that, like, one popped bubble also makes the other speculation bubbles all pop, you know? Once people start to lose their homes, everyone will blame Trump. That's the thing. No, they won't. It's crazy to think about, but ultimately, Trump himself is immune from blame here. Like, as trite and liberal as it sounds, the Republican Party, the far right in America, is a cult. It is a cult of personality, and it is also just a regular cult. And Trump is the cult leader, at least the cult figurehead, in that he can literally do no wrong to people. Plenty of people will probably blame the Republican Party, as well they should, because the Republican Party is, and Elon and the oligarchs are all driving this train. But, you know, Trump is also in the conductor's car, and they're not going to say shit about him. Like, Trump could do unspeakable things in front of his supporters, and they still would not have anything negative to say about him, you know? Yeah, I feel like there was gonna be something else that I want to add to that, but I think that basically encompasses that. The Republican Party is gonna be blamed, but I doubt if Trump will catch any strays from his base. We've been seeing this happening too at the town halls. A lot of the Republicans are still like diehard Trumpers. They're not blaming Trump for any of the spending cuts, even though he's the fucking president, you know, allegedly. What a Great Depression level event. Yeah, that was a really sad blue shell. Rip to that guy. What would a Great Depression level event mean in the modern day? Honest to God, I think it means one of two things. Revolution, like truly revolutionary tier unrest, or we get FDR2, you know? Those are the two long-term outcomes I see happening as a result of like a crisis so bad that it tanks the whole world economy. But I don't know what timescale we're looking at with that. One thing's for sure, we're going to be alive long enough to see the housing market collapse and the entire economy crunch in on itself and make all our lives worse and shit. But I don't know if we're going to see any of the recovery or the revolution that happens afterwards. Because one unique thing about now, as opposed to 2008, is that there's a much more advanced oligarch class and far right now than there was in 2008. In the 1920s and 30s, liberalism was sort of in crisis. That's what led to a lot of fascist movements in Europe, was like the genesis of revolutionary politics, being reacted to by the owning class and whatever. The crisis of liberalism is so much more thorough now than it was in 2008. Like, you think about all the advances that were made in the 20th century, all of the medical tech, the communications tech that made everybody's lives better. There was like, everybody was lauded the ideas of like rationalism and scientific achievement and shit. And basically what was not present in 1932 or 2008 that is now is just a massive resurgence of peasant brain, Like, the contradictions here, are no longer capable of being suppressed, Of course, they're gonna still, the government and the owning class are still going to try to suppress them as well as they can, but it's like, with every day that they let the house of, they don't let the House of Cards collapse, things are just gonna get worse in the future. It's not great. Yeah, once this happened to a degree after 2008 as well. One of the big things that resulted in the economy bouncing back for the wealthy but not the poor and middle income is that the banks and whatever, because these big companies got bailed out, they still had the money to buy houses, So they just bought up all the housing. That's why you have so many corporate landlords now, where you actually kind of didn't used to. Is that they just went and bought all that housing when it was at all-time low prices. After the crash. Essentially, the crash, it's just what I described. It was like a rug pull. The crash created the perfect opportunity for banks and companies to do the exact same thing again, to create another crisis before the last one was even finished happening. It sure as shit fattened their pocketbooks. And it consolidated wealth at the top is what it really did. There were, admittedly, there were a lot of people who were pretty wealthy in 2008 that lost a lot of stuff. There are a lot of people who are wealthy now who continue to lose stuff, but that just means that the club just gets smaller and smaller, and that club always wins. It's just a matter of who gets to be in the club. Somewhat a mirror of the French Revolution? Kind of, yeah. The French Revolution was a legendary moment of detachment between the ruling class and the population. We saw a similar sort of deterioration of the notion of responsibility to the populace among the nobles. There used to be a concept of the noblesse oblige, which is partly how the nobility was so, or not nobility, the aristocracy and feudalism was so stable and able to maintain itself, because there was a governing doctrine that encouraged the owning class to provide for the needs of the working class and the serfs below them, to an extent. That motivation with the competition that is inherent to capitalism, that's no longer present. These crises are a result of competition to get more and more money. The speculation, that gambling, that investment, it's all to one up the other guy, everybody else be damned. And in that way, yeah, it is a mirror to the French Revolution. Legendary degree of detachment between the owning class and the working class. I know it, like, a lot of this sounds like waffling, and it kind of is waffling about, oh, the revolution is coming and whatever. And I know that, like, it's non-specific in that sense, but I really wanted to hammer home just how bad this crisis is about to be. That as much as, you know, I could be LARPy and say that, like, oh, the revolution is coming, if this crisis is how bad I think it's gonna be, which is to say, like, way worse than the 2008 crisis, it will bring about what Lenin called revolutionary circumstances, where the suffering of the masses is much more acute than usual, and the political and class consciousness is also much more acute than usual, and the direction of that consciousness at the ruling class is also more acute than usual. There's, like, all these factors are sort of coming together, and this like a financial collapse of the housing market and whatever, when housing is a perennial issue, is going to accelerate that. Hence accelerationism. You know, if you accelerate to the point where we have revolutionary conditions where people are suffering so bad they want to do a revolution, then you get a revolution sooner, you know? So basically right now we're experiencing the Gronk, oh no, it's all falling apart, except you look inside and it's actually, oh yeah, it's all coming together. You know? Man, I'd volunteer for a revolution. It's unlikely that the revolution will be centralized enough for you to call it a revolution necessarily as it's happening. I mean, maybe it will be recognizable in that way. But what happened in... what's going to happen, I think, is that part of the formation of this political and class consciousness is going to take the form of a, like, I guess you would put in air quotes, communization, where people naturally start to gravitate towards whatever kind of community exists. They try to, like, desperate times force people to seek out camaraderie and stuff where they might otherwise not, usually. And that, like, leads people to sort of adopt a mindset that is contrary to capitalism more and more, or something like that. Because a lot of neoliberal capitalism, it revolves around atomization of everything down to the individual level. Like, nothing outside of the individual exists. There is no society. There is no community. Everything is disconnected from everything. I think as we approach, like, as we get into times of crisis, people are of necessity going to start connecting more again. You know, socially, just to one another, but then also they're going to try to create some sort of safety net or social structure so that the bottom doesn't fall out from under everybody, and so people don't die in massive, massive numbers. You know? That tends to happen when economic hard times befall a society. But again, a lot of this is non-specific because I'm talking in such big historical terms because this is such a big historical event that I actually don't know when is going to happen. I can point to, like, general things, hence, you know, revolutionary conditions. Yeah, like shanty towns in the Great Depression. We might see more of those. That's possible. But again, I don't know for sure. And what I wanted to cap off with, I know that there are a lot of people that will take somebody not being the most knowledgeable about something, and they love to just use an opportunity to be pedantic, which of course you gotta take what you can get, right? The world's a rough place. You gotta try to find whatever W's you can, even if you, like, made them up in your head and you get to pretend to be right and shit. Like, I totally get it. Any one of these three things, you could say I'm, like, not financially literate enough or not economically literate enough to understand the full implications of. But you put all three of them to, like, you could take all any one of them on their own, but, like, the list of problem banks expanding and the FDIC no longer telling people how much the problem banks have, and the like, housing delinquencies being higher than 2008. You can't argue, however pedantic you want to be about any one of those things that I could, you know, non-specifically gesture at, you can't argue that those things point to anything good happening in the future. Like, you cannot argue that those three things taken in context, or even to some degree out of context, like in context or out of context, you can't argue that any of those is a good sign. You have to acknowledge that these are all really, really bad signs. You know? I mean, you could argue that, like, nuh-uh, but, like, you would be wrong and also stupid. And that's what I wanted to highlight. You know, a lot of people are, well, a lot of people are a lot of things. I don't know. I don't exactly know where I was going with that, but, like, you know. I know in the past there have been some people that, like, you know. Like, fucking, actually, nothing ever happens. And then thing happens, they shit themselves. I don't know. Look. The West has fallen. The West is falling. Billions will, I don't know, either die or experience economic struggle or something like that. That's the point. Alright? This has been a very winding segment already. Future me cut it there, I suppose. I don't have much left to say. Yeah, my ADHD train of thought is, you know, it is boarded at the station. It's made its full trip, but it wants to keep going, and as a result, now it's kind of derailed. So, end the segment there. Thanks for watching, and support the channel if you would be so kind.